Welcome to the Board Game Marketing Podcast. Let's cue the intro. This is the #1 podcast to learn marketing strategies for your board game. Whether you're just starting on your first game or an experienced designer, you've come to the right place. My name is Nalin, and let's talk marketing for your game. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Board Game Marketing Podcast. In this podcast, I interview creators who have successfully funded their ideas on Kickstarter to learn more about their journey to launch and help you formulate your own plan. I also bring on experts in the tabletop space to talk about all the facets of marketing and building your game publishing company. If you've been listening for a while now, you know that I hold nothing back. So in these episodes, be prepared to hear me ask the hard questions and really get down to the finer details. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Board Game Marketing Podcast. Today, we're really lucky to have Emma on the show, and I'm so excited for everything that she will be sharing with us today. So, Emma, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
That's great. So I would love it if you could tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself to get us started.
All right. My name is Emma Larkins. I'm a board game designer, podcaster, streamer. You might have heard of my games such as Abandon All Artichokes, Heart Catchers, and Then We Died, Unravel, and a few more in the works. I co-host a podcast called Ludology, where we talk about the why behind games. Also do a weekly board game news show with Gen Con TV, and I run a digital playtesting group, which is still called Seattle Tabletop Designers, even though we're international now. Got to work on the name for that, but we meet every week and test board games digitally.
Incredible. You have a lot of things going on, and I think that it would be great to start off with kind of how you got into board game, because you told me the story the other time, and I'd love if you could kind of share it with us, because a lot of people kind of stumbled upon this industry in a similar way too.
Yeah, I find a lot of people are brought into it, or some might say sucked into it at a certain point in their past. So for me, I've always been a video gamer, digital gamer, so way back when I was a young kid, PC games mostly. But as far as more modern hobby games go, played a little bit of Catan, that kind of thing, in college. And it wasn't until I was living in New York City that I really rediscovered board games. My boyfriend at the time, now husband, is the one who really started to get me into it. When I met him, he had the wall of games. And so I started to learn more about that. He was also working on his own card game, designing a game. I was in a community and then eventually running a community of video game designers in New York City, and some tabletop designers, but mostly video game designers and musicians, that kind of thing. So I was in the design scene, and then my boyfriend was working on a game. So all of that kind of combined together until I made my very first board game, which was a Valentine's Day present for him, for Phil. And it's exactly as corny as you would expect it to be. It was construction paper, hearts pasted onto cards. I thought it was just a silly, fun thing to do. And then I made rules for it. We played the game, and he said, this is actually a pretty good game, and you should continue to work on this. So I started getting into the New York City, shout out New York City Playtest Group, now remote playtesting. I started getting into events there, testing my game, learning more about the industry, and just went on from there.
I love it. I love how, it started off as just, a gift and just being kind of peripheral to the community. And then, like you were saying, being sucked in.
Yeah, exactly.
So with this first game, can you tell us more about how you started kind of marketing yourself as a designer from there, actually? Because that's kind of the big topic I wanted to touch on today, because you're doing it so well, right? You have all these different channels, you have the playtesting group, you have Discord, you have all these things now. How did you go from that first game that, you played, enjoyed it, and you're like, hey, I'm going to start doing this thing, and where you are now?
So I Uh, I'd say lucky in some ways that I have a marketing background, not a marketing education. It's just something as I was going through my career, working for small businesses, it's often a skill that people don't have. And so it was something I worked on developing. I did my own kind of freelance businessy stuff. I was doing online writing for a while. And so I'd already started to build up something of an online presence for a completely unrelated cause, for writing, marketing, business type stuff. I had a Twitter. I have to double check how old my Twitter account is, but it was long before I started designing games that I actually had these social media presences. And so there's kind of the dual avenues for this. There's online, digital, and then the in-person. I almost don't want to say marketing, because it's just going to events and going to playtest events and meeting people, making friends, right? Getting to know people in the industry is just so amazing and fun and valuable, you know? And I would say to people, don't treat it like your traditional vision of marketing necessarily, you know, don't mark out, okay, I'm going to meet 10 people, I'm going to get all of their information, I'm going to do follow-up emails, although I do know people in the industry that do that successfully, so it's an option. But you can do it, you know, casually, and it doesn't have to be this big thing where you're fighting to get connections. I think a lot of people see networking as kind of a dirty word, and for me it's just, you know, making friends. I still am friends with a lot of those people. Gil Hova, for example, is one of the very first people who play tested my games, this game that I made for Phil, Heartcatchers. He tested it. It was very different from the other games that were in the group. A lot of more medium, heavy Euro, more complicated games. And he sat down and played this 10-minute game with me and gave me really good feedback. And years later, I'm doing a podcast with him, right? And Gil is one of my favorite people on the earth. He's just such an amazing person. And by making that connection, you know, strengthening those connections in person, now digitally, but still with people, you know, is a really important part of kind of getting your stuff out there and getting known.
Yeah, and that was a lot of information. So I wanted to kind of break it down a little bit more into kind of tangible bits for people. When you talk about kind of making relationships with these people and kind of getting to know people, what kind of avenues would you recommend for people just getting started? Or is there certain questions that you like to ask when you're first getting into the industry? Is there any tips or advice there just for people just coming into the whole space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the tricky and scary parts is putting yourself out there, and there is very much, you do have to take some leaps of faith. Back in the day, obviously we would go to an in-person playtesting group or go to a convention, which is a great avenue. For now, physical in-person things, not really an option, but you can still do a lot of these same things digitally. So I mentioned the digital playtest group that I run. And honestly, I think it does capture a lot of that atmosphere. And I feel I'm becoming very connected to the people in the group. Other people are becoming connected to each other. We have channels where people can discuss their games and kind of get to know each other a little bit better. So just finding these groups, and a lot of them are very low barrier to entry. In a lot of ways, it's easier than the in-person groups, because in an in-person group, you're there, right? You're standing there in the corner, maybe awkwardly and nervously and just hanging out. Whereas with the digital groups, you can lurk for a little bit, see how things work, see how people are interacting, listen in. You know, there's a lot of ways that you can do it that are very low stress, I would say. So looking for some of those groups. If you go to the Ludology Guild on Board Game Geek, we have links to my group, Gil's group. We tweet about the groups. We have Facebook groups for those. So just kind of looking into these digital places, looking for Discords, looking for Facebook groups that will post events for these kind of things. There's a lot of Facebook groups too that aren't necessarily digital playtest focused, but where you can start to talk to other designers. And even Twitter, there's board game Twitter, and that's almost easier to get into because you don't have to get into a group. You just start liking people's tweets and replying to them, and honestly, like, you can get really good access to a lot of designers. I've been a little lax lately, but most of the time when people tweet at me, I'll tweet back to them, even if I don't know them from one of my groups. And that's how I've gotten to know a lot of people in the groups. One of the people, Estefania, who helps out with my Discord group now, we were talking in the group, and then we were tweeting back and forth, and that's how we established a relationship.
I love it. I love that it is such kind of an open community, and that people can come in with no knowledge or not knowing anything at all and just really be welcomed. So for people who are new to digital playtesting groups, what can they expect to see and happen inside these groups? And also, is there anything they have to do to prepare for these playtesting groups?
That's an excellent question. Every group is a little different, but absolutely I run my group in such a way that anyone can show up and they can kind of figure it out from the ground up. As long as you can get Discord and figure out Discord, but we can answer questions about that as well. So we have scheduled meeting times where you can go in there, click on a voice channel, and then people will be in there, we'll be organizing tests. But other times when we're not doing live events, the Discord is still there. You can post messages, ask questions. You can send messages directly to the admins if you're not sure about how to join a channel. We have a lot of help sections where you can read more about getting started with things. And we also do this cool thing I really like where we stream the playtests for a lot of the tests that are going on over the course of a night. So even if you're not ready or you don't have the software to test yourself, you can jump into the voice channel and it streams right there in Discord. The software tools are so great for this because you can just sit there and see exactly what happens, hear our feedback in real time. I think it's the best way I've ever seen to really get a sense of what does it feel like, right? If someone is playing my game live digitally and people are giving feedback, how do people respond to those kind of things? So that would be the base level, pretty easy to jump into. If you are ambitious and want to go a little further with it, most of us use Tabletop Simulator to put our games in digitally. If you're doing a complex game, it can be a little tricky, but if you're doing a simple card game, it's pretty straightforward, and there's a lot of good tutorial videos. You can probably get your game in there in an hour or so. Or just go to the workshop with the mods and start playing around in there. There's a lot of really good stuff out there. So for a beginner, it might be a little tricky, but if you're ready to get your game in there, get it in Tabletop Simulator, and then we organize everything around that.
Perfect. No, that was a really comprehensive answer. And I like that there's a way for people, a very low barrier to entry, right? They can just kind of see what's going on first before even kind of jumping in. Too.
Yeah. And I, like, that's one of the most frequent questions I get often from people who've never even thought about designing a board game is just like, well, what do you do? What do I do? How do I even do that? And there's people who want to make a board game who don't even know, like, putting stuff on a card. They don't necessarily have an editing software. They don't know how to cut up a sheet into cards. Like, they're just very beginner level, but they still want to make a board game. And that's so exciting to me because I think people are intimidated by making a video game, right? They're like, oh, I could never make a video game. There's software and stuff. I couldn't do that. But people believe that they can make a simple board game. And I believe they can do it too. And it's so cool to see those people go from the desire to do that to having a game.
I love it. I can hear the passion in your voice when you talk about it. Like your voice is kind of like lit up when you talked about it. So from here, right? People are, you mentioned forming relationships. You mentioned kind of the getting into these digital playtest groups. How do people take it to the next level, right? How do they start marketing themselves as, hey, I'm a game designer and this is what I'm doing? How do they get from just getting to know people to being solidified as a game designer in the space?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things we do in our group that I believe is very valuable is everybody has to use their names in the Discord. and pronouns too, which is important for people to know how to address each other. With the names, we are identifying each other as ourselves, which makes it easier to talk to each other, but also makes it easier to find each other in the real world in places like Twitter and on Facebook, right? So that's the next level of that, right? I know this person, I know their name, I've tested their game, they've tested my game. I might send them a message after the test saying, I really like this game. I'm excited to see more about it. You can do that through Discord. You can go on Facebook and connect to people there. With the caveat, not everyone is looking to connect in that level. Not everyone uses their social media for board game marketing purposes. So being respectful, that's putting the feelers out there. They might not respond to it, which is totally fine. You can start to make those more global connections, right? Connecting on different platforms, I think, is a very powerful way to build the strong relationships. And I want to point out real quick, you're going to make a lot of weak connections and strong connections, especially social media, doing a podcast like this. People will know of you, they will have heard of your name, but those really strong reciprocal connections are the ones that are going to be, when you start your first Kickstarter, they're going to be most excited about talking about what you're doing. When you're pitching to publishers, like I talk about people's games on Twitter and I'm connected to these publishers, right? Like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited that so-and-so is, with permission, of course, transparency, like, oh, I really hope that this game is picked by this publisher because I love this game, or whatever, we'll just very supportive of each other on these channels. So taking it from that connection, strengthening those connections, really just having presences in places. So very first of all, have a Twitter. I really advocate for Twitter, as long as it's personally safe for you to do so, having your name or something identifiable that you can connect back between the different platforms. And like, that's a way that you can really start to establish yourself, establish your presence, and start to get your name out there as a designer. If you want people to publish your game, or if you're going to do a Kickstarter or self-publish, get your name out there, eventually attached to your publication company.
Got it. Yeah, that was really clear, kind of step-by-step what things you could do. And you've been mentioning a few different platforms, right? You mentioned Discord, you mentioned Twitter, you mentioned Facebook. What can you kind of give us an analysis from your perspective? Which ones are more important? Are there ones more important during the beginning of your time as a game designer? Ones that are more important, when you're launching a game? I'd love to hear more about that from your perspective.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have a whole weird meta breakdown of this in my head.
Love it.
Yeah. So Twitter is first and foremost when people would come to the designer groups, and not necessarily the super new people who were unsure about it, but the people who were very gung-ho and wanted to dive right into the industry, is very much Twitter. We are all very active on Twitter. We have a very loose circle. We all kind of know each other on there. And so just being a part of that and becoming a part of that conversation is good. And it can be as much or as little investment as you want it to be. I think it's important to take a moment to talk about personalities and temperaments. And, not everyone wants to be on social media all day. And I'm very much not advocating for that. In fact, I just turned on the timer on Twitter on my phone, so I wouldn't be on Twitter so much, because I was more doom scrolling than using it for business, which is what I want to be doing. But just being on their Twitter, part of the conversation, that's really that's where we go, talk about our projects, talk about some personal stuff. I would say it's very kind of casual, surface level connections there. A lot of board game people are also connected on Facebook, and I see Facebook, don't love the platform. I have to say that I know a lot of people don't. So when I'm advocating, I'm saying yeah, we got to put up with it. But what Facebook does is it makes a little bit more of a personal connection, right? Because you have your profiles on there. You have your connections to your family on there. We can see more personal stuff. So again, it has to be something that you are okay with doing that, or curating your profile. There's different things that you can do. But what's nice about Facebook is a lot of business is honestly conducted through Facebook Messenger. A lot of I've contacted a lot of reviewers through Facebook Messenger, people who might work for me on a project or work for you on Kickstarter. You can connect with them, connect more personally there. It's weird. We don't do as much like going to their website and emailing them. A lot of it is just happens to be done through Messenger more casually like that. And then Discord is great for having a place to really center a conversation. So the best Discords I've seen are very focused around a small friend group or around like the Seattle Tabletop Designers Playtest group. It's centered around an activity. People who play board games have Discords. So it's a place where you can go and talk about that thing and have a persistent space where you can always refer back to conversations. And then the voice channels is really nice to get that more personal connection by hearing people's voices.
Got it. Wow. Yeah, I really like the breakdown that you talked about there, where Twitter is really kind of like a big outreach type of tool where you start that conversation. You're getting more focused with Facebook by forming those personal relationships on there, and then getting even deeper down with Discord where you talk about a very succinct kind of topic.
Yeah, and I guess I should mention Instagram. I'm on Instagram too. Posting a little less than usual, but a lot of board game stuff is pretty photogenic, and I think it's a good place, more like Twitter, where you're building a platform, but I have made connections there as well, so it can be just another place. If you're more into posting pictures than posting text, a lot of it too comes down to where you are most comfortable yourself, because I don't think marketing should be suffering. I think it should be something that feels natural and hopefully not too painful.
Yeah, I love that. A lot of people are saying, tell me, like, Nalin, I really don't know how to use Instagram. I'm not a big fan of Instagram. I'm like, it's okay if you don't use this platform and you love being on this other platform, you're going to find a community there too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So with all of this said, right, like with Twitter, Facebook, Discord, Instagram, are there ways that, you personally, and you would recommend other people, maybe there's the same, there's a difference, recommend kind of interacting with the platform? Do you like kind of go searching for hashtags and just seeing what people are talking about? Do you kind of just go down like a follow path where you see the recommendations and you kind of follow them and see a recommendation, follow them and start going there? Like, how do you approach kind of getting to know people on these platforms?
Ooh, yeah. I have a system and tools for this. I especially like Trello, which is, I think it's part of Twitter at this, not Trello, TweetDeck. Wow, I think I was looking at the icon here. Trello's great too for other stuff, but TweetDeck for Twitter, I think it's part of Twitter now. But if you go to tweetdeck.com, this is a great tool for, it feels like my spaceship UI, like I'm on the Starship Enterprise, right, with all my windows up here, all my different columns, and I have different columns so I can quickly see who interacted with my stuff, replies. It's a really great place to just scan down, and you can send replies to people really quickly, see your own content that you've posted. One of the best columns I have in here is, I kind of just call it favorite people list, because you can make lists of people on Twitter, and once you start to follow a lot of people on Twitter, especially, your feed gets filled with a lot of noise. Especially now, it's filled with a lot of news, which can still be important to interact with and engage with, but it's good to have a focused place and have a focused time, say like, hey, I'm going to look at the people who I want to form a better connection with and see the kinds of things that they are excited about and things that they are doing. And it makes it easy when you have them all on a list to go through, like their stuff, send a reply to their tweet, really liking people's stuff and replying to tweets and retweeting their things, like quote retweeting. All of these things are really great and powerful ways to build stronger connections. Of course, with the caveat, keep it honest. don't just have a list of people and like check every heart button in that box and send like a emoji response to 10 people. It's very important to be organic and truthful and honest. If someone sees you in person, or if they reply to you, he's like, oh, you engaged with you liked my thing, that was really cool, what did you like about it? You have to be able to honestly respond to those things, right? So if you're being too mechanical about it and methodical about it, and you're not really emotionally engaging with these things, then it's not genuine, right? And people will see right through it, and you'll get to know the people, like, oh, so and so is just out there doing shady things, liking or like following and unfollowing, so they keep popping up in your follow feed or that kind of thing. So it's still humans that you're dealing with, I think, is the most important thing to remember, and to be kind, be genuinely excited about what people are doing, be giving, share people's content more than you share your own, stand up for people on social media platforms, be there, be friendly. So just being a person who people would want to be around, I think, is an important part of it. And then I would say some amount of participating in hashtags, doing the meme things. If everyone's posting pictures of a thing, that's, people like that tends to get a lot of engagement. Being fairly focused on whatever it is that you're on Twitter for. So if you're designing a board game, publishing a board game, keeping mostly board game content, but I think it's really important to be human too. Like, a lot of my stuff that gets people most excited is, just pictures of me being sushi from Sushi Go, or holding up my game and being really excited. If people want to be passionate and excited about the stuff that you're doing. So if you just post announcements like, hey, our game is here, it's available for play testing or whatever, and you're not engaging and making content, which is what you're doing, that people want to consume, then you're going to have a tough time of it.
Yeah, I saw that picture of you with the sushi. I laughed out loud at the
Yeah, exactly. I mean, social media is content, and what are you giving to people that they're going to want to consume? There's just there's an infinite amount of content out there, and people have to choose to consume the things that you're putting out there. So, put things out there that people want to interact with.
Yeah, so a lot of people coming into this, like, this is great advice. If people are on kind of the shy side, right, they're a little more reserved and they're kind of not ready to create content yet, do you have any recommendations for those type of people?
Yeah, I would say you get a lot of mileage from some of the less involved interactions. So retweeting people's content, liking people's content. I think people get shy for different reasons. For some people, if they're shy putting their personality out there, or putting too much of themselves out there, it can be great to share the stuff that they're working on. So if you just share pictures of a project, then that can be easier for you. For people who are shy or scared of sharing their work, you can do a little bit more about post pictures of your cats or something. Find the things that you feel more comfortable about sharing, because it is all about comfort level. If you're not comfortable doing it, you won't do it consistently, and consistency is such a big part of it, one of the biggest parts. Like, you have to do it on a regular basis to make it be effective. So part of it is feeling out your comfortable level, doing what you're comfortable with, and the other half of that is pushing your boundaries a little bit over time. And at a certain point, you do have to, I don't want to say overcome shyness, but come to terms with it and find something that will either work for you or change yourself to make you work with the system. I used to be incredibly shy. In high school, I would hide. I didn't eat a single day in the cafeteria. I would hide in the hallways. people are baffled now when I tell them these stories, but it's absolutely true. And it's something that over time, I'm like, this is what I want. I want to make things. I want to get things out in the world. And in order to do that, I have to get myself out into the world. And so I would go to an event and be incredibly awkward and eat a lot of snacks. And over time, it got better. So it's one of those things that finding the right balance, not pushing yourself too hard, but pushing yourself a little bit outside of your comfort zone.
Wow. Thank you for sharing your own story there. I can relate to this. Like, just,
yeah.
I know a lot of people are going to kind of listen to it and be like, wow, I see myself in Emma. And like, well, if she can kind of get out of her comfort zone and kind of like push, her boundaries, like you were saying, just a little bit each time to get to where she is now, like, why can't I? Right.
Yeah.
So this is great. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for coming on and just sharing all of this about insights about kind of marketing yourself as a designer, kind of what tools you're using, what platforms you're using. Is there any kind of other final advice that you want to kind of leave our audience with too?
Final advice. Yeah. I think I always say this, I forget if I mentioned it earlier in the podcast, but everyone is a game designer. Like you pointed out the fact that I got so excited about new designers getting excited about design. And I just think it's really cool when people come to this. They usually have very exciting, fresh ideas. They do things in a different way. And that's really what I think our industry needs, is just fresh eyes, fresh faces, fresh designers. Especially recently seeing a lot more diversity in board game design and more people coming to it from different backgrounds, which I'm really excited about. So I don't want to say don't be scared, because it can be very scary, but the fear is okay and you're going to be okay. And I really hope that people who are just getting into it take those first steps and, dip their toes in and start to make their way. It can take a lot of effort and a lot of time, but it's very much worth it. And then for those people who are in the industry, who've been here for a while, who've done some of these things and are maybe a little bit frustrated or unsure, I have very much been there. Like my Twitter for years at a time, just couldn't find ways to connect and engage. And really all just comes down to keeping at it, continuing to experiment with things, connecting with new people, having conversations, being yourself, being fun, being engaging, and just keeping at it.
Wow. And incredible, kind of sign off advice for people from at all levels. So thank you. And if listeners want to learn more about, what you're working on, all the, the playtesting group, things like that, where can they find you and where can they kind of get in touch with you?
I'm Emma Larkins pretty much everywhere. So on Twitter, on Twitch, I have my website at Emma Larkins, www.emmalarkins.com. I have on Twitter, email contact. I'm most active on Twitter. So again, you want to reach out to me there. And go on to the Board Game Geek Ludology Guild for finding the links for the Discords. Always happy to have new people in a Discord. And look forward to chatting.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Emma.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that wraps up our episode today. If you found what we talked about today helpful in any way, please be sure to leave a review to help others find this podcast. And most importantly, if you're feeling that fire and you're ready to get started on your Kickstarter campaign, be sure to head to the show notes of the podcast. I've linked some of my resources that others have used to successfully launch and get funded. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Board Game Marketing Podcast. For daily tips and advice, find us in the Board Game Marketing group on Facebook. See you next week.